This week, the agenda added up the costs of moving Ontario forward, explored 3 countries in the grip of divide, and considered the consequences of climate change. The agenda's Week in Review begins, however, with a visit to North Bay.
Let's get back to our discussion now with David Tabachnik, Tracy Marshfjord, George Burton, David Robinson. And I want to pick up just from where we left off over here, which is, of course, every city has issues. Every city has problems it has to deal with. And let's just get a cross-section here. David, to you first. What do you think the biggest issue facing North Bay is today?
I tend to think in terms of where are the opportunities for it to develop. And I think the city's actually doing a really good job of building on the base that it once had as the gateway to the north. It was the gateway to the north because it was supplying the towns and the mines and the forestry operations to the north of it. One of the things that came out of that is it has engineering firms and manufacturing operations in order to supply other communities, and those have developed into export operations. They've also been the basis of the aviation industry that's come out of it. So it's actually, in some ways, the most industrialized, modern industrial town in Northern Ontario. How it builds on that is its biggest challenge, and how it supports the development of the region around it, because of course it is a service city. It's a city that provides a support for a very large area to the north, to the east and the west of it, including an agricultural area that's developing as climate changes. And so a challenge for the city is to provide some leadership and help those small communities that don't have the capacity develop so that the city itself can take advantage of their growth.
David, please.
Well, if I can just sort of add to that, I'd like to just point out the obvious here. We were talking about the population of the region and of the city. The province has grown substantially while we have not, and in fact some areas have declined. I think the province over the last 5 years has grown by about 6%, and tremendous growth, of course, in places like Toronto and Ottawa. That's where economic growth is happening in Southern Ontario and Central Ontario. So even though I agree, of course, our history is as the gateway to the north or the near north, the future of the province seems to be in the south. Our culture, our history, our character is northern, undoubtedly, but in this in-between place as a gateway, I think we suffer almost from an existential crisis. We don't quite know who we are or what direction we should orient ourselves. And that's a real major challenge, I think.
Heard a lot of rumble from the audience there, which may not be agreeing with what you've got to say. George, pick up if you would.
Well, David, I think that a lot of attention is focused on the growth in Toronto and Ottawa. Absolutely. That's 2 largest population centers in the province. But I do think that the gateway aspect does have a very bright future from where I sit. Frankly, I think that we just have to decide what we want to be as a city and as a region to support it, and how we leverage what we already have. We've got a great history, we've got a great foundation here, engineering, absolutely, the service sector, absolutely. So it's what do we do next is the question, I think. And whatever we decide to do, we'll be successful at it, because our history tells us that we are. And going back to an earlier comment about the best part of this region is, frankly, it's the people. We have the most industrious people I've ever come across anywhere in the province. And I think there's enough talent in this city and within the region to be whatever we want to be. So I'm very optimistic about remaining a gateway. In fact, it might be not only a gateway to the north, actually the gateway to the south. And I see this working both ways, frankly. When I look at the resource sector and some of the resources that we have in this province, I see the flow going actually the other way, as we being that jump-off point for people coming from the south to the north. Because I don't see the manufacturing sector in the south ever being what it used to be. It will recover to some extent, but it's going to be very, very different. And geography is no longer a determinant of success on the global stage.
I would like to agree with you and see this community grow, but I mean, that is going against global demographic trends. David, you've already mentioned this. People are moving from less populated places to more populated places. That's what's happening in Ontario. That's what's happening in Canada and around the world. Furthermore, they're moving closer to the American border, right? So they are moving south. So I would like to see what you're talking about occur, but it would be quite a challenge and quite surprising to see that happen. Things seem to be moving the other way.
Tracy, what do you see as the biggest challenge?
I think a challenge for us is ensuring that our local industries are supported and that they have the ability to move forward, whether it's through innovation, research and development. And so when you talk maybe, David, about some of the issues that you've brought up, and then also, but to George's point, is I think that's really a role that we all have to play in supporting the various industries that reside here in North Bay and surrounding regions. Make them competitive locally, regionally, provincially, nationally, and then of course globally, and ensuring that we can support them as best as we can.
Picking up on that, George, when did you become president? What year?
2010.
2010. You met with local businesses when you took over the job?
We did.
What did you hear from them?
What I heard from them is that they're aware of the need to grow, to change, to remain competitive. And what I found was a willingness to expand what they're currently doing. What they don't have, and part of our solution we brought, was access to some technologies. Because we're always fighting against a scale issue. And your point's well taken around major trends. But it's infusing technology where they have a chance to play with it, to see whether they can create a business case. Because most of our firms are small and medium-sized companies. So how do you allow them to infuse technology while reducing the risk to them so that they can compete provincially, nationally, and globally? That's what we heard.
Do they tell you, here's what I need you to teach at this place so that when you graduate your people, they're actually able to work in our workforce?
That's an ongoing conversation we have through program advisory committees, the people in the street that I meet and all our staff meet with. Of course, what we're looking at is what's needed today, but what's going to be needed in 5 years' time. And so we're looking at this through two lenses. And we have to keep those two lenses in play because we do not know what 20% of the jobs are going to look like 5 years from now. And that's part of our challenge.
Tracy, how do you educate students for jobs down the road when we have no idea what most of those jobs are going to look like?
I think we have to look then at giving them some basic skills in their ability to look at things through the critical and creative thinking atmosphere, and really giving them those tools so that regardless of what they're faced with when they get out immediately upon graduating, but then also down the road as things change, that they're able to deal with those changes as well. And I think that's how we address them. We can't foresee too far into the future, but we can certainly prepare them so that they're prepared.
I want to pick up on your comment a moment ago about climate change, because I guess for most people, climate change is frightening. But does climate change, if the Earth gets hotter, open up some possibilities up here, and are people thinking about them and planning for it?
I'd say there's not much planning going on. Yes, there are some opportunities. The two big things is that agricultural production is going to expand. And the other one is there will be a massive transformation of the forest industry across Northern Ontario. Environment Canada is basically predicting mixed grasslands all the way from Manitoba to James Bay.
In 50 years.
In 50 years. But that means those trees are going to be dying off. They're going to be subject to insects. They're going to be subject to disease and fire.
That doesn't sound good, David.
That doesn't sound good, but if you think about, if you were planning for it, what you'd be mounting is a massive salvage operation. You'd be converting it into, I think, cross-laminated timber that you'd export to China so that they wouldn't use concrete and steel for their buildings, and that would reduce the carbon emissions of China and the developing world while giving us a chance to replant and redevelop a whole new forestry industry for the next century.
I'm trying to imagine a situation, though, where, you've got the equivalent of a quarter of the population basically saying, here we are, help us. My math isn't great, but it's almost as if more than 8 million people just showed up to Canada and said, take us in.
Oh, much more than that. You're right.
It's like
yes,
that. And
absolutely.
Can you...
It's like 500,000 people arriving in PEI because Lebanon's just twice the size of Prince Edward Island. Yeah.
How well are the Lebanese getting along with their new visitors?
They have been extraordinary. Nothing short of that. Their generosity has seen no limit. But it is fair to say, and one has to say it, they feel the pinch, and tensions are rising because Lebanon has suffered a lot from the Syria crisis. They've taken a big economic hit and loss of trade and investment. tourism, consumer confidence. Their economy is really running to the ground. And they are now trying to subsidize the arrival of all these new people with not enough support from the international community to help them do so.
Here's how you put it in the New York Times last year, in fact. You said, they are putting enormous pressure on water, sanitation, education, and healthcare systems. Wages are plummeting. Lebanese workers complain they can no longer find jobs, which Syrians will do for much less. Poor Lebanese envy the international food, shelter, and medical aid given to the refugees. Shopkeepers resent the competition brought by new Syrian-run establishments that they say are undercutting prices. The anger could boil over. Already there have been curfews imposed and sporadic attacks against refugees. This seems worrisome. This looks like it's leading to a crescendo that is not going to be pleasant.
It may not be, and that's why we continue to say to the world, please come to the assistance of Lebanon. Help this small country cope, because it simply cannot do it on its own. We've done a lot of interesting projects in the last 6 months to help local communities and manage the increase of refugees in their areas through improvements to schools, water and sanitation improvements, power generators, bringing services that these communities didn't have before, because refugees are living in some of the most impoverished Lebanese communities as well. This is helping to mitigate the tensions, but clearly a lot more is needed.
So what do the people who've got the money, like the IMF and the World Bank and Western countries, Arab countries, what are they doing to help out?
There's been quite a bit of support for the humanitarian appeal, and that has been a lot, but not sufficient, is what I would say. So last year we were only 53% funded. This year we're just over 14% funded for the entire year. So we really need to continue interest to keep up the support for the humanitarian program that we have in place, and by that I'm talking about for all agencies. But we're also saying, please governments, use your development funding as well. Use your stabilization funding to help shore up Lebanon so that Lebanon doesn't collapse and the conflict that we see now in Syria does not play out in much more dramatic terms in Lebanon.
Freedom of religion is guaranteed under the Constitution of Indonesia, is it not?
Yes, the Constitution explicitly says religious freedom, but the government now introduced a new concept. It is called religious harmony. It means that the majority, the minority things is going into considerations. And in 2006, the government set up what they call Religious Harmony Forum, hundreds of them all over Indonesia, every regency, every province. The purpose is to maintain more or less the percentage. You talk about the percentage in the beginning of the show. That is the mantra of the government. Islam, certain percents, keep it that way. House of worship should represent more or less the percentage of the Muslim or the Christian. And that's why making a house of worship for the minority right now is extremely difficult. There are hundreds of churches being closed down over the last 8 years.
Well, we pointed out off the top there's about 87% of Indonesians are Muslim. Does that mean 87% of the mosques or of the houses of worship in Indonesia are mosques?
According to the government data, mosques are only 78%. Meanwhile, Muslim are 88%, according to government data.
So they want more mosques.
They said it should be boosted. Meanwhile, the Christian is about 10%. Meanwhile, churches are about 19%. There are too many churches.
So they're literally going around and shutting down churches.
Well, they don't shut down churches, but they make it difficult for new churches to be established. And of course, there are hundreds of churches that are being closed down. Of course, it is ridiculous because Christians have different denominations.
Yes.
The Presbyterian do not pray in a Catholic church and vice versa. Inside Indonesia, churches are also divided in accordance to language group, ethnic groups. If I speak Batak, for instance, this is an ethnic group, of course I don't pray in a Javanese-speaking church. This is like going to a French church, French language church, or a Dutch language church.
I see. How many languages do you speak?
7.
7 languages.
Yeah.
English and what else?
Well, the others are mostly local dialects inside Indonesia.
I see. Okay. Your president, whose nickname I guess is SBY,
Yeah.
Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono.
Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono.
I got pretty close. How has he reacted to all of this religious violence?
Well, he vows that there should be no tolerance against violence made in the name of religion. And President of Iran, Ahmadinejad, even raised the issue of Shia against Shia Indonesia with President SBY. And he promised that he will take actions. He said that before the Islamic New Year last year, all the Shia displaced villagers will be returned to their village. But until now, they are still in their displacement camp. He talked, but he does not deliver what he talked. He doesn't walk what he talked.
I gather you're over here in Canada because you had some meetings with our ambassador for religious freedom.
This is interesting.
And how did the meetings go?
It was a great one. I think he knows his business. He impressed me so much with his understanding about the issue. He's going to travel to Jakarta next month, and he knows that there are discriminations against Christian, Ahmadiyya, Shia, Sufi inside Indonesia. He told me that Indonesia is a top priority country on Canadian foreign policy in terms of religious freedom.
Let me just follow up, Cherise, with you quickly on one thing, because you remember, go back a bit here, the Premier once upon a time struck a panel that Anne Golden, former Conference Board of Canada chair, chaired, and you remember that panel.
That's right.
And you and your panel put forward a bunch of recommendations on how to raise the $2 billion a year that experts say are needed to invest in what we're talking about tonight. The Premier rejected half of your advice right out the gate. Was that sensible in your view?
Well, we put forward 20 recommendations. One of those recommendations was a gas tax. So the Premier has actually reflected a number of other recommendations in her speech. I mean, some of those have to do with a type of reliable debt financing formula. Some of those things have to do with repurposing, things like the HST. As well, we put forward some detailed criteria on how to make decisions around what we're going to invest in terms of transit, so that we're making the best choices if we're going to be spending all that money.
But you apparently made those recommendations because you thought that was the best way to pay for all this, and she immediately took HST, gas tax, income taxes off the table.
I would respectfully take a different view.
Yeah, and so what I wanted to
did.
finish off with that is say, yes, some things were taken off the table, but I actually don't think that these revenue tools need to be off the table for the long term. I think that this is a long game. This is a floor, not a ceiling. And I think that we need to be talking about these tools going forward. This is an opportunity to get started, to start building, but I think given that this is a long-term 25-year transit plan, we're going to need more than the money that's on the table. We're going to need money for operations and maintenance, and we are going to have to put those revenue tools back on the table and have some serious discussions about these and others.
But I think the important point here is, look, the Board of Trade was the first one to actually put recommendations out. Business, which you would not expect to be the first voice to say, put your hand up and raise taxes, actually a year ago went out and put 4 potential revenue tools forward. Metrolinx followed suit, the Transit Panel followed suit, and they put revenue tools on the table the same as what we had put forward. We know that those are broad-based tools that are back against the principles of fairness, balanced, and economically responsible. We now know what's come off the table, and yes, politics is very much at play here. We can talk about that. But importantly, we now have a much narrower suite of tools that are available in terms of what's coming forward in the budget. So how do you get to the principle of fairness? When fairness talks about they are broad-based because we all contribute and we all benefit, and in fact, transit investment is the most progressive. We know. So a small regressive tax, all organizations from left to right would say is actually very progressive. But we're now down to a pretty narrow suite of options in terms of what will be on the table for May. So it's highly politicized, and it is inconsistent in terms of recommendations that the organizations have put forward.
We'll get to some of those other recommendations that are out there in a second, but I still want to hear from you on this. Your organization, I think, has tended to be agnostic on how you raise the money, just that we need to have the money raised. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So as you're hearing from my colleagues here at the table, part of the conversation is around what revenue tools are we going to flex. The first part of that conversation, though, is helping to bring a lot of voices to the table to even acknowledge that new revenue tools are an important component.
And you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have been able to spend the last, almost tomorrow actually is the 2-year anniversary of our transportation campaign. And along that, we've been able to bring voices from obviously the business world, but also from residents across the organization and from the GTHA. These are just regular people. They aren't politicians. They aren't transportation experts. You know, these aren't members of the media. These are people who have a voice to share about the transportation issue and why this is so important in their life. Part of what our job has been to do in this great transportation discussion and debate is to make sure that those voices get shared with the people that have the ability to make some decisions. And government, at the end of the day, has to pull the levers in what this package is going to look like. But making sure that this has become a topic of conversation, that this stays top of mind for every level of government and every election that we may be facing in the next several months, and making sure that those personal stories around quality of life factor into this. I mean, I have to say, I'm fascinated by the world of policy, but the fact that transportation has become the kitchen table discussion around our region and city is just remarkable. It's replaced weather. It really has.
Got the worst commute times anywhere in North America. It's not surprising.
We absolutely do. You know, I think about Los Angeles as an example. They get to wear the banner of having better weather than Toronto, but my goodness, we have worse commute times in some cases than Los Angeles.
What's wrong with this
These
picture?
are not awards we want to win. Yeah.
Okay, having said that, though, the Premier has been quite categorical in what's off the table, Carol. She has been less categorical in saying what's on the table.
Exactly.
So we are inferring from that that the corporate tax rate is going to go up. Do you infer that as well?
I would say it's a possibility.
Well, you'd go further than that, I bet, right?
It's a possibility.
It's
Nobody knows.
but
Who knows? We don't know until May 1st. We know what's off the table. So is it a possibility? Yes. Wealth tax, is it a possibility? Yes. Sale of assets? It's a possibility. Good public policy to review your assets now and then, but they're not sustainable income or forms of revenue over a long period of time. So, but that is another possibility.
So is business going to feel picked on? You know, again, if the idea here is to make whatever new revenue tools are as sort of equitable and fair as possible, is business going to feel picked on if much of the funding for this comes from a rise in the corporate income tax?
So I'll go back to the principles that we put forward and others have put forward. Fair, balanced, economically responsible. And I think the fair and economically responsible are critically important here. So if we're going to talk about corporate income tax as a possibility, and it would appear that it certainly is on the table, then let's talk about it in the context of potentially we know that we've got higher energy costs. We know that we have a higher minimum wage that's coming. We know that we have the concept of an Ontario pension plan potentially there. Now let's consider putting another half a point, whatever, of corporate income tax on top of that.
$300 million bucks?
It's about a couple $100 million. Is about half a point. You know, so a point is somewhere just under $400 million. So now you're saying, now let's add that on top of all those other considerations.
Too much?
At a time when the economy is very tentative. The finance minister has said they don't think those projections are going to come in terms of revenue growth. And you have to put the question of, is this economically responsible? I'm not so sure.
They are quagmires. The Middle East, the abortion debate, Northern Ireland, climate change, all intractable conflicts, long-standing differences in belief and ideology. Joining us now to tell us why these conflicts are so particularly intractable, in New York, New York, Peter T. Coleman. He is director of the International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution at Columbia University. And Peter Coleman, as I welcome you to the broadcast, perhaps you could just start by telling us what kinds of conflicts in your work through Columbia you have studied.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me on. So we study what we call intractable conflicts, difficult long-term conflicts, or quagmires, as you suggest, at different levels. We study them in marriages and families, in community debates over polarizing issues like pro-life, pro-choice debates. And then we study them at the international level. So we've studied the civil war in Mozambique, we study Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we study Northern Ireland. So really at all levels, a similar type of phenomenon exists.
And what qualities do these conflicts have to have before they rise to the threshold of being what you would call intractable?
Well, unlike most conflicts, the vast majority of which we can resolve constructively, and even unlike more difficult, complicated conflicts that may be tough to navigate but ultimately are resolvable, Intractable conflicts typically have a long history of being highly destructive, enduring, and if you look at the history of them, there's been many attempts at good faith approaches to resolving them that seem to be ineffective. So they resist intervention, they resist diplomacy or approaches at negotiation or mediation, and they really just get stuck in these long-term patterns. And that's what we consider intractable.
Now, the Middle East is one kind of intractable conflict. The abortion debate is another kind of intractable conflict. Do they have something in common, those two seemingly very disparate things?
Yeah, they can. Again, it depends on the particular nature of it. So we studied a conflict in Boston here, in the city of Boston, over pro-life, pro-choice, because it had reached in the mid-90s here a sort of fever pitch, and there was a lot of hostile rhetoric, and then there were incidents of violence. And in that case, there were very similar dynamics that we see there and that we see in Israel-Palestine and in other more violent long-term conflicts around the world. And that is essentially that they're very complicated, right? So the issue of pro-life, pro-choice, the issue of climate change, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an extremely complicated set of issues, really set of different conflicts, different players. But typically what happens over time is they become more and more kind of enmeshed. There isn't any one particular element of them, politics or hidden agendas or hate or enmity, that necessarily feeds them. It's how all these things sort of come together and really constrain people so that if you're in one of these conflicts, you really feel like it's bigger than you and you don't really have many options. And so you do what you think you should do, which is usually stay in it and probably escalate it. So very complicated conflicts that become experienced as extremely constraining of those involved. Even the leaders. Leaders very often feel like they have very few good options in these types of conflicts.
And you do see climate change through that prism, is that right?
Well, I see the debate on climate change through that issue. It's interesting because a few decades ago, environmental researchers would look at climate change, and if people were sufficiently educated in the issues and the problems, it wasn't an intractable issue. It was something that reasonable people agreed on, even though there were different proposals for solutions. But today, the issue on climate change has really fallen into the divide of sort of right and left, right, of sort of progressives and conservatives. And so it's not an issue seen in and of itself. It's not studied or approached as a purely technical or scientific issue. It's seen as a political issue. And so people tend to oversimplify it, which again is a very complex set of issues, but people think about it in very simplistic terms. And because of that, it's very hard to make political progress on the agenda.
Do you have any, I don't know if you can point to a moment in history or how this climate change debate somehow evolved from one over scientific facts to one over different ideologies. Do you have a moment where you saw that happen?
It's hard to say exactly when that happened. I think that there were sort of reasonable attempts to address issues around conservation and the environment for many years in this country and in Canada and throughout North America, throughout different parts of the world. But at some point, when it started to be used politically as a political wedge issue, it started to be used in a way that was not about addressing the problem. It was more about sort of gaining leverage from using the problem as a divide. And I would say that it probably started to happen around the signing of the Kyoto Protocol or the negotiations around that protocol, when that issue became very hotbed there. I think it probably became more polarizing in Canada, I think around the 1980s, I think, when your Prime Minister proposed more radical solutions that the public reacted strongly to. So I think at different points in history in different countries, the issue is put on the table, and when it's put on the table, it can become very polarizing when it's seen as primarily a political issue, not as a practical issue or an issue of necessity.
And do we infer now that because it's on your list of intractable conflicts that we're not going to solve this for decades and decades? Can we infer that?
Well, we can't. I mean, I think that there are some strategies available to us. I mean, I do think on the political level that there is some progress that does occur. And I think politicians, the onus is on them to grind on and try to do the best they can to make political compromises that are palatable on both sides and that will move the agenda forward there. But I think when conflicts get really stuck in that kind of dynamic, that kind of polarizing dynamic, the onus falls to others, business and the non-for-profit organizations, to sort of think creatively. And I would say there's sort of 2 or 3 strategies that can be used beyond the political strategy. One is really to, what I would say, sort of rise above that fray and have members of business, corporations, perhaps members of the government, but also members of the community and the academic community come together and identify sort of pro-business, pro-green initiatives. This is something that Denmark did in the 70s during the oil crisis there, where they really saw that crisis as an opportunity to become one of the world leaders on wind energy, on wind turbine energy. So they developed wind turbine technology, and today they produce 20% of their own energy through that. So Denmark presented an illustration of that. And today, if you look at the statistics, something like 86% of businesses see climate change and the change of temperature around the planet as both a business opportunity and as jeopardizing their business, jeopardizing their standard business practices. So they see this as a ripe opportunity. So I think it really becomes beholden on them, business leaders, and on academics and members of governments to work together with them to move beyond the discussion and the political divide of the debate and really just identify solutions that are out there that can meet both needs.
And that is the Agendas Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're all on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.